Good evening, I'm Klaudia Czerwińska and you're watching World News Tonight live from Warsaw. The world is now experiencing its largest oil supply shock in history, losing nearly 20 million barrels of oil supply per day, with Brent crude prices reaching record highs. More on that in just a moment, but as we go to air, here are some of the other major headlines. Ukraine is sending advisors to the Middle East. In return, it expects supplies of Patriot missiles. Europe among world's biggest arms importers as governments react to Russia's threats and waning confidence in U.S. security. And a hot air balloon crashed in the Polish city of Zielona Góra, leaving 1 dead and 2 injured. $120 for a barrel of Brent crude. This is the new reality on global markets, with prices reaching record highs not seen since June 2022. And yet, for now, the G7 countries did not deem it necessary to release oil reserves. More on how the conflict is shaking up the oil industry and its possible consequences in Sonia Agatabishtan's report.
Just how high is the price of conflict? As the U.S.-Israel war with Iran continues and oil prices surge to their highest levels in years, this was the topic of discussion for G7 finance ministers on Monday, with the group urgently convening to discuss their next steps amid an energy crisis.
We are ready to take all necessary measures, including drawing on strategic stock reserves in order to stabilize the markets.
But in their teleconference, the group reportedly reached an agreement not to release the oil reserves just yet.
The idea of releasing stockpiles would be to try and tame prices, to try and ensure availability of crude oil on global markets. The decision over whether or not to use stockpiles is a tricky one, because it really depends upon the duration of the conflict.
It could be detrimental if the conflict went on for an extended period of time and the G7 oil stockpiles were diminished, with the market having become even tighter. The EU argued that there is no imminent oil supply shortage in Europe. Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk said that Poland is also safe for the coming weeks, but longer-term supply is less certain. Nevertheless, Polish drivers are already feeling the impacts of the situation at gas stations.
We are headed for a situation where we see the biggest daily rise in oil prices since 1988, when futures started to trade.
Sounds dramatic.
The price of Brent crude, the international oil price benchmark, approached $120 per barrel early Monday, hitting its highest level since June 2022.
Basically, 1 week after the war started in Spain, just to give our example, gas prices have increased by between 15 and 28 cents per liter in barely 8 days. So we're suffering from those consequences.
The development stems from several factors. Gulf states have cut their production as strikes on energy facilities across the region intensified, with Bahrain's Babco oil refinery being among the latest to be hit. Moreover, the effectively closed Strait of Hormuz, through which roughly 20% of the world's oil and gas passes, means that exporters in the region like Iraq, Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar and the UAE have been unable to ship their oil and gas abroad.
The Strait of Hormuz is probably the most important energy choke point in the global energy system. Roughly 20 million barrels of oil per day pass through the strait.
The last time oil reserves were released was in 2022, after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, when both global oil and natural gas markets were placed under heavy strain, begging the question whether the Iran conflict could be nearing a similar tipping point.
So far, I would say it's not yet at that point, but it certainly has the potential to be at that point. Again, if supply again is able to come through the strait, and in the next few weeks we start to see this opening again, probably it will go down in history not as quite significant as the 2022 energy crisis. But if this continues for a few weeks and months, the fact that there's so much, 1/5 of global gas and oil supply stuck there, it definitely has the potential to become at least equivalent to the significance of the Russian invasion of Ukraine and associated energy crisis.
According to Reuters, it is not that the G7 were against releasing the oil reserves, but rather that the timing was wrong, with more analysis needed to make the call. For TVP World, Sonia Agatabishtan.
Mojtaba Khamenei is the new supreme leader chosen to be the next head of the Islamic Republic of Iran. A man who for years remained in his father's shadow has a lot more influence behind the scenes, with his appointment considered a rebuke to U.S. President Donald Trump's stated intentions with Iran. In this next report, Aaron Demon takes a closer look at the profile of the new supreme leader and what his election could mean for the war in the Gulf.
Almost a week to the day that American and Israeli strikes killed Ali Khamenei, Iran's regime has a new supreme leader, Khamenei's 56-year-old son, Mojtaba. These are some of the rare pictures obtained of a man who has largely kept a low profile, never holding government office, nor giving reported public speeches or interviews. But for many years, Mojtaba Khamenei has been rumored as holding sway behind closed doors, even as his father allegedly dismissed the idea of hereditary succession.
So the fact that Mojtaba Khamenei is now the new supreme leader, tells us much more about power politics in the system today. The hardliners have the upper hand. If they didn't, Mojtaba Khamenei's appointment would have been a question mark. Now it's become a certain.
That win for the regime's hardliners will be viewed in Washington as a direct rebuke to U.S. President Donald Trump, who has demanded to be involved in the appointment process and called Mojtaba Khamenei an unacceptable choice.
I guess the worst case would be we do this and then somebody takes over who's as bad as the previous person, right?
In fact, the decision could face dissent in Iran itself, given the Islamic Republic was founded after the overthrow of a monarchy, with leaders officially named on religious and leadership grounds, not family ties. On the flip side, it wasn't just the younger Khamenei's father killed last weekend, but his mother and wife too, leading many to believe that he will refuse to bow his country to the West.
Whatever is left of the Islamic Republic leadership clearly is saying a big no to Donald J. Trump.
Key to Mojtaba Khamenei's power will be the country's Revolutionary Guard, or IRGC, answering directly to him. An influence not afforded to President Masoud Pezeshkian, who told the world that Iran would stop striking its Gulf neighbors without provocation, only for attacks to continue over recent days.
The Iranian military and even the Ayatollahs don't totally control Iran. They are not the power structure in Iran. That's the IRGC, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps. They are a paramilitary force behind the force. They actually have far more weapons and far more control over what Iran does than even the Ayatollahs.
That means Russia's Vladimir Putin, a close military ally to Iran, has been quick to endorse the new supreme leader, while Israel has already warned it would kill whoever was given the top job.
For people who thought that this war was going to perhaps open the door and produce something better for Iranians, and maybe a more inclusive or open day after, certainly Mojtaba's selection indicates that the system is hardening and will take forward, at least for the time being, a strategy based on resistance.
As it stands, the European Union has revealed the younger Khamenei is not yet covered by EU sanctions, despite him being under similar American measures since 2019 and reportedly linked to a luxury European property network. A sign, perhaps, that U.S. diplomatic cables leaked in the late 2000s had it right when they reportedly referred to Mojtaba Khamenei as, quote, the power behind the robes. That quiet power now leading to a rising sun.
In response to Washington's call for aid in intercepting Iranian drones, a group of Ukrainian experts will travel to the Middle East to help countries assess how they can defend against Iranian technology without using expensive Patriot interceptors. We are now going live to our correspondent in Beirut, Oz Chatterjee, for more. Good evening, Oz. So bring us to speed on how Ukraine could lower the cost of U.S. operations in the Gulf and what could it get in return?
Well, look, the Ukrainians have been dealing specifically with these threats of the Iranian-made Shahed drones, these slow-moving drones with payload, not huge payloads, but large enough payloads to cause a significant amount of damage. Now, these are fairly easy to shoot down with conventional methods, but the problem is that they are quite cheap to manufacture. So you can launch a lot of these things and expend expensive ammunition trying to deal with these drones. So Ukraine, over the course of this war, has developed its own lower cost ways of dealing with these drones instead of using the expensive Patriot missiles, which they need to deal with the cruise missiles and ballistic missiles that Russia launches, which are fast-moving, large, high payload that are very difficult to intercept with anything other than modern advanced air defense systems. Now, Ukraine does not have enough of these modern advanced air defense systems across the country, also the ammunition for them to defend against the ballistic and cruise missile threats. What they do have is their own domestically produced interceptor drones, which they use to great effect against these Iranian Shahed drones. Now, what the Ukrainians are offering is providing this technology, this expertise to the Gulf states. But what they want in return from the Gulf states is those Patriot missiles that they have been expending to deal with these drones. Ukraine can use them a lot better, a lot more cost effectively in Ukraine against Russian drones than the Gulf states are currently using against these cheap Shahed drones. So the cost of firing off these missiles is very, very expensive to deal with quite cheap drones. So it's a mutually beneficial exchange for the Ukrainians. They say they're able to produce enough of these to be able to export them. But one thing they can't produce is these Patriot missile interceptors. What they really need to deal with those advanced Russian ballistic missiles. So the Ukrainians will be hoping that in exchange for this support, the Gulf states will be able to provide them with the Patriot missiles that they still have in stock and not use them against the Iranian threats that are currently targeting countries across the Gulf.
Thank you so much, Oz. That was Oz Kataji reporting for us live from Beirut. Europe now claims the title of the biggest global arms importer, but also a major arms supplier in the global arms industry. This comes as the U.S. has shifted its priorities and focus to the Indo-Pacific and the Middle East, forcing Europe to reconsider its strategies around armament and defense. Our defense correspondent Zuzanna Jurek has the details.
Europe is arming up, and the proof is in the pudding as the old continent has officially become the biggest global arms importer, consuming a staggering 33% of the global arms imports between 2021 and 2025. And it's not just imports, as Europe climbs the charts as a key supplier in the global arms industry. France, Germany and Poland saw a significant percentage increase in the number of arms they've exported directly, though the United States remains a global leader. Researchers suggest that the push and pull factors involved in the procurement equation may mean that American dominance may soon change.
One is how reliable the U.S. will remain in delivering arms. And the second one, it will depend on specific weapons. What we are seeing is, for instance, that the safe loan mechanism has incentivized several European states to order, for instance, self-propelled howitzers, Caesar, which are French-produced, which they may not have ordered from France otherwise. But at the same time, when it comes to, for instance, long-range air defense systems, it's still Patriot from the US that's in demand.
And as Washington laid out its strategic priorities and the US shifts towards the Indo-Pacific, the Western Hemisphere, and more recently the Middle East, there may simply not be enough to go around for everyone.
This shift that occurred with Trump's second term had a great impact on Europeans. So as of now, it is quite clear that the US security umbrella, the US capabilities when it comes to production may not be enough.
And though the Swedish Gripen and French Rafale fighter jets are being sought out as alternatives to American F-16s for Ukraine and its war effort, experts note that Europeans will continue to seek US arms.
There's still a lot of discussion about need to import for very different reasons, being the lack of specific capability or just desire to, for instance, strengthen the relationships with the US.
But it is also likely that soon enough, Europe's growing multilateral cooperation will play into the balance of trade.
I think you'll see a lot of regionalization. I think you'll also see a significant increase in Sweden's own exports. It seems that their Gripen, for example, is extremely popular. You'll probably also see greater French exports around Europe. There haven't been so many because they were in many ways direct competitors with the United States. But now that the United States is less strategically reliable, we'll probably see more French involvement there.
As the European industrial base continues to expand with the support of initiatives including the EU's Security Action for Europe or SAFE low-interest loans program, European arms procurement within Europe is set for an upward trajectory. For TVP World, Zuzanna Jurek.
Slovakia's Prime Minister Robert Fico declared an oil emergency, warning that the country would join Hungary in its ban of a 90 billion euro loan to Ukraine if the Druzhba pipeline does not resume operations. All this as the economic situation in both countries worsens. A lot is at stake, especially in Hungary, as the country nears its general election this April. Our correspondent Andrew Sweeney brings us up to speed on the latest.
Oil reaching over $100 a barrel has Central Europe reeling. Slovakia is already relying on its strategic oil reserves after the Druzhba pipeline stopped processing Russian oil in January. Prime Minister Robert Fico declared an oil emergency, issued vouchers for energy bills, and said he may join Hungary in blocking a military loan for Ukraine until the oil supply is restored.
Blocking this huge military gift to Ukraine is a legitimate tool to achieve the restoration of oil supplies. In any case, the ball is now in the European Union's court.
In Hungary, the economic damage is more apparent. Prices are up. The forint lost 6% of its value against the euro in 1 week, nearing 400 to 1. Fears of inflation are rising. Prime Minister Viktor Orban, who like Fico blames Ukraine for much of the crisis, has introduced petrol price caps while demanding help from the EU.
The Ukrainian oil blockade and the war in the Middle East are sending oil prices soaring. Europe must act. Today I wrote to President Antonio Costa and Ursula von der Leyen calling for the review and suspension of sanctions on Russian energy.
Orban hopes lifting those sanctions will help boost his oil supply ahead of general elections on April 12. His anti-EU Fidesz party is up to 20% behind the pro-Europe TISA in the polls. TISA's leader, Peter Magyar, blames Orban for making consumers foot the bill for the rising price of oil.
TISA is demanding immediate tax cuts and government intervention in the fuel market. With this inaction, Viktor Orban is risking the complete collapse of the Hungarian economy and the forint, a dramatic resurgence of inflation and the further impoverishment of Hungarians.
The economy is one of Magyar's key focuses. He appointed former Shell Vice President István Kapitányi as his economics expert and pledged to unlock 20 billion euros in EU funds. However, Orban's smear campaign associating him with Ukraine, the increase in prices, and an unproven claim that Kyiv may attack Hungarian energy infrastructure may chip away support.
What's happening might be quite frustrating for both Orban and his challenger Peter Magyar. Another proportion of the electorate which has moved to Peter Magyar in the last month from uncertain voter camp or from Fidesz might move back.
As for the military loan for Ukraine, oil crisis or not, Poland's Prime Minister intends to see that it's passed, with or without Budapest or Bratislava.
I'm convinced that Europe can safely use the 90 billion euro for Ukraine without waiting for additional approval from Budapest. We will not keep coming back to this issue just because Mr. Orban is currently more favorably disposed toward Russia than Ukraine.
European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen has not answered Orban, but today she also made it clear that Ukraine will receive the loan. For TVP World in Budapest, Andrew Sweeney.
Meanwhile, Sunday was a decisive day for the southwestern German state of Baden-Württemberg, where elections for the new state parliament saw the Greens party come first, with conservative Christian Democrats taking second, followed by the far-right AfD. More on the importance of this result in Sascha Farbach's report from Stuttgart.
Baden-Württemberg, this is iconic territory for cars, for industry in Germany. This is a place that has big names, Mercedes, Porsche, Bosch, and it's also become the political battleground here for that state election. The Greens have come out on top, just clinching it, looking at about 31.5% over the Christian Democrats, the Conservative Party. That is the party of Chancellor Friedrich Merz. Now, the hope was that they would clinch and make it first, that the Conservatives would regain this state, if you will. For the past 15 years, this has been led by the Greens. That was one of the reasons here. The big question, would the Conservatives step back in? This, before 15 years ago, was territory for the Conservatives, and they were hoping they would change that. They'll still likely co-govern with the Greens. Now, how practical that alliance will be interesting. Now, generally also, other parties did some much better, some fell short of the threshold. Let's hear now some reaction of the party brass.
This is a sensational result. It's fantastic. And what a positive signal from Baden-Württemberg to the rest of Germany.
In the end, this cost us votes, because every voter knows that their vote in this neck-and-neck race could really influence the outcome.
We achieved the largest increase of all parties here, and it is the best result in the state elections in Baden-Württemberg. We have achieved a very good result and can be very satisfied with that.
Now again, real quick, super election year across Germany. Baden-Württemberg is 1 down, 4 to go. This is also going to have impact on a national level as well. The next one just 2 weeks away in neighboring Rheinland-Pfalz. Now that'll be a showdown between CDU and SPD. Very much junior coalition partner of Friedrich Merz. Now they did very poorly here, roughly around 5.5%, just over that threshold. Now they've been losing ground across Germany. If that will continue, we'll have to see. Also, one big winner of the night, the AfD, making inroads here even further. From last time around, about 4 to 5%, 8%, now have jumped to almost 19%. Now, they'll be in opposition, but this is also significant that the far-right party now also present here in southwest, western Germany, out of their eastern strongholds. That is going to probably energize them as they try to get more impact across the country. So this is no longer just about this region, it's for all of Germany, and what kind of impact that will have on the coalition and German government will now be a very, very interesting question. That's Sascha Farbach for TVP World in Stuttgart.
A hot air passenger balloon crash landed on Monday in a city in southwestern Poland. One of the 3 people on board jumped out of the basket as the balloon was descending. She did not survive the fall. The tragic event unfolded shortly before 8 a.m. local time in the city of Zielona Góra. Witnesses saw a person jump out of the hot air balloon as it was rapidly descending over an apartment complex. The woman fell onto the roof of one of the buildings. First responders pronounced the woman dead on the scene. The 28-year-old victim has been identified as an award-winning member of a local flying club. The 2 other passengers remained in the basket until it touched down, emerging unscathed. The war in Iran is entering its 2nd week, and the choice of the new supreme leader signals continuity of hardline policies. To discuss the latest from Iran and its impact on international dynamics, as well as the war in Ukraine, Diane Francis, senior fellow at the Atlantic Council, joins me on the program. Thank you so much for joining on World News Tonight. So let's continue. As I said before, the choice of the new supreme leader signals continuity of hardline policies in Iran. Donald Trump said he's not interested in dealing with the new leader. What does the new leadership, considering the context, mean for Iran? And we are encountering some technical problems, but we are going to be back with our guest in just a moment. And just to give you a quick reminder, we are going to focus in this interview on the situation in the Middle East and the consequences that it could potentially have on the war in Ukraine, as we focus here on TVP World on the latest. And obviously, as the U.S. is focusing its trajectory towards the Indo-Pacific, towards the Middle East, with the consequence of the new leader being chosen, the new state leader, we will be seeing some difference when it comes to the support of Ukraine. Just a quick word of a reminder, we also saw that in the last few days, the trilateral meeting, which was yet another trilateral meeting, which was set to take place between the representatives of the U.S., Ukraine, and Russia, was set to take place to discuss further conditions of a potential potential peace plan. However, it had to be postponed due to that crisis in the Middle East taking place. And if I'm correct, we are trying to re-establish the connection with our guest. Once again, Diane Francis, Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council, joins me back here on the program. Good evening. Thank you for joining.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much. It's great to have you back. So, as I said, the Supreme Leader, the new choice of the Supreme Leader is showing the continuity in hardline policies in Iran. What do you think this new leadership, considering the context, mean for Iran? Are we going to perhaps see a new strategy when it comes to the Islamic Republic of Iran, or we're going to see business as usual?
Well, unfortunately, he's the worst possible candidate they could have picked on a number of levels. He's the son of the Ayatollah that was just killed and assassinated by the Israelis, who started this war and started the revolution in 1979. And this is one of his sons, and he's a hardliner. So I think what this means is more of the same, and I think the regime will double down on their attacks against all the American allies and in the region and out of the region.
So we are seeing that the oil prices are surging over $100 a barrel. The U.S. Actually announced temporary release of sanctions on Russia to deliver to India. Do you think that this situation that is currently taking place with the oil deliveries is going to give Russia a significant advantage in the war with Ukraine? Is the Russian oil no longer a pariah?
Well, I don't think so, because they're not. There's oil distribution problems, not only in the Middle East but around the world, and you're going to have a situation where the higher prices will benefit Russia in a small way for a while to finance its war. On the other hand, Iran was its principal weapons supplier, and the Americans, the Israelis, are destroying all of their capability of building and shipping and hiding drones and missiles across Iran. So this is very bad news for the war effort.
So would you say that the longer the war in Iran continues, the wealthier Russia is going to get and stronger? Or when we consider the Shahed drones and the technology that you mentioned, we know that part of the operations when it comes to assembling these drones was actually moved to Russia.
Yes, that's true. But I think that a good part of the components and the other materials that go into the making of these things have been, destroyed or degraded dramatically. I don't think this makes Russia stronger. And then you also have to remember that Ukraine is making great gains in the eastern part of the country, and it is also bombing behind the enemy lines and attacking oil facilities and other things inside Russia.
So how could Ukrainians actually balance out the growing Russian advantage? I mean, we've seen that Washington reached out to Kyiv to gain some help when it comes to anti-drone technology. As we reported here on our program, there is going to be a delegation sent to the Middle East to aid that. But is there going to be a way of balancing things out?
What do you mean by balancing things out? Getting more weaponry from the United States?
Getting more weaponry from the United States. We know that President Zelensky also mentioned the Patriot missiles for the possible help in the Gulf.
Yes, it looks like they're trying to horse trade and do trade swaps and all kinds of things. The Ukrainians have a drone, have a digital warfare system second to none. And I think that this is going to be offered, and if it isn't already, be utilized by the Americans and the Israelis in this war. So that's something that they can trade in return for more help in their war from the United States. And of course, Europe is also arming itself very rapidly. And this also competes for weapons in terms of getting them into the hands of the Ukrainians. But I think the Ukrainian war is not going to be all that much affected, unfortunately, because I'd like to see it ended as soon as possible. But, there's no question that Russia is degraded in terms of its stature worldwide. When Iran goes down, and it will, Russia will no longer have a means of stoking trouble and instability in the Middle East and also through Europe. A
no call it.
Sorry.
So how about we jump to our next question then? I would like to get a perspective on the war in the Middle East from the U.S. According to polls, the war in the Middle East is not very popular among the American public. How long can we expect it to go on, considering that we're going to see midterms this year?
Yeah, well, yes, midterms in the fall, but, the news cycle changes so dramatically people's minds on a dime that, that's still a long way off in terms of changing any kind of policy. Look, Trump has got a grip on his Pentagon. They are doing very rapid attacks. They are going to make a difference. They're going to degrade Iran. And they're not going to approve this new leader. So I think they'll step up. The American public is concerned about another Iraq or Afghanistan, a forever war, because Trump has hinted he's going to put boots on the ground at some point to clean up maybe after he's finished in Iran. That worries Americans because that's hugely expensive and questionable. But what's interesting is that 61% in a credible poll of Americans believe that Iran is a huge national security threat to the United States, which means that more than half the public knows that Iran has to be stopped.
Thank you very much. Diane Francis, Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council, was my guest on the program. Thank you so much for joining me. And so this would be all the latest news for now. Thank you for joining. I'm Klaudia Czerwińska, and I hope to see you back here on TVP World for more news and features in just a moment. But until then, good night.